My name is Tim Kaiser, and I'm the school resource officer at Colonel Gray. And because of that, that means that I take care of Colonel Gray, Queen Charlotte, and Birchwood, and all the feeder schools that come into Colonel Gray. There's another school resource officer named Dale Johnson, and he's at Charlottetown Rural. He takes care of Stone Park and all the schools that feed into there. And I'll talk a little bit later on about what our jobs is and how it's changed since its inception about almost 5 years ago now. With me is Ron Kennedy, and Ron Kennedy is a drug recognition expert with the Charlottetown Police Department. And he'll talk a little bit about his credentials and say what his job is a little bit later on. And we are fortunate tonight to have Carmina Gaete. She's with Mental Health and Addictions, and she's going to speak to you also a little bit later on. And she's a complex case coordinator for mental health and addictions. So what we're doing now is we've had a couple student sessions and we've had some parent sessions in light of recent legislation for cannabis in Canada. It is a new era for Canadians, and it's a different time for us and how we are going to address the issue of cannabis use with our youth. The conversation has now changed. The reality is that cannabis is no longer criminally illegal for our youths. When we're talking about the age limit, federally, there's some different misconceptions as far as what is okay and what isn't okay with our youth. The federal government has left it, in some instances, some of the legislation to the provinces to decide as to what they're going to implement. So we're going to be discussing that a little bit tonight. And there's also, since I work at the high school, I'm definitely seeing a difference in relation to the attitudes of young people towards driving with somebody who's impaired or driving while impaired while under the influence of cannabis as opposed to liquor and alcohol. So we'll be discussing that a little bit, and we're going to be discussing what happens when you combine the two. And Ron's going to be dealing with that as he is the drug recognition expert. And I'll get Ron to talk a little bit about his credentials right now.
Okay, thank you. Like Tim said, I'm Ron Kennedy. I'm with the Charlottetown Police Service now for 22 years. I'm the provincial coordinator for the drug recognition program here on Prince Edward Island. It's not a big title, it's just a lot more work I have to do. No special pay, no nothing, just more work, like everybody else. But it's a very interesting field, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll open up the floor to some questions. I'll talk a little bit about the oral fluid, if there's an appetite for that, about the new impending oral fluid screening device that the province will be purchasing. And if you had any questions on the graduated driver program, or and I'd like to talk a little bit about the effects of the, like Tim said, of marijuana and alcohol use combined, and the myth that a lot of our teens have with that, how it's not only our teens, but some young adults and even adults. So I'll talk a little bit on that as well.
In the high schools, I have all kinds of interaction with our students, and it's becoming apparent that when we discuss drug usage, it seems to be that one of the main times where they're becoming involved, it seems to be at the grade 8 level. And it kind of makes sense, because from grade 6, in grade 6, they're desperate to please mom and dad, and they're very much still your little ones. Then all of a sudden they get to grade 7. Grade 7, they're kind of finding their way, but they're still highly influenced by mom and dad. Grade 8, they kind of are in that flux, because in grade 9, they're top of the food chain again for the junior high level. So that grade 8 level seems to be a flux area for them. And we are definitely finding when you're speaking with them, they're extremely honest. And they will say that, you know, a lot of their drug use would have started probably around the summer of grade 8 and then into grade 9. And then it continues on into grade 9 in that summer, and then all of a sudden in grade 10, when they're at the low end of the food chain again, they're trying to find their way again, but now they have that drug culture with them that kind of follows them, and they tend to gravitate towards other students that because they're looking for that acceptance, and that's how they tend to fall into that trap. And you know, we had the issue with script drugs was huge years ago, but it's not this. We're not finding that that's what we're dealing with now as much. It seems to be that there seems to be a little bit of control in that area right now, but we still see speed, and we see the marijuana on a regular basis. One of the big things that when you're talking to the youth is it's not necessarily always just for the recreation reasons. We see them talking about self-medicating for anxiety. And that's the big term that they use is that I'm using this in order because I just can't deal with what's going on, and I get all these pressures and things aren't going right at home or whatever, and they continually use that word anxiety. We have parents that talk to us and they say, when we did our last session, one of the parents got up and said, well, at what age do we start having the conversation about drugs with our kids? Like, what's too young? And this was at the junior high level. And I said, well, your kids have already started the conversation because we've already had it with them. Because in the elementary schools in Charlottetown, unfortunately, because it's not in French, we don't offer it at your school. But there's a Healthy Me that we have 9 officers that go to every grade 6 class in the Charlottetown area. Summerside are going to be adopting it as well, and with trained officers and offering this. And what this is this was designed by the Making Waves Group students at Colonel Gray. So it is a program designed by students for students. And we had some great people like Tyler Larder, Julie McCabe, Ashley McGuigan, all got involved, and we started talking to students about what are the challenges that they're really facing, like what are some of the pitfalls that they really need help with that we can start talking about younger students with at an early age. So we used to offer the DARE program in Charlottetown, but we now offer Healthy Me because we wanted something that was more current and with what students are dealing with today and what they perceive as problems. And the DARE program would take 10 sessions to offer, which is a lot out of the classroom time of a teacher, whereas this program only takes 4 out of the classroom, of which an officer comes in and presents. And it's extremely interactive, which is good because you want to keep the kids involved. And the first part is a bit of a self-awareness lesson with them, where we ask them who they are, what makes them them, where they get their values, what are their influences, what would cause them to change their influences, and get some kind of thinking along that line. And the next session they come in, and we talk about coping skills. And that is one that the elementary schools were very glad to have us come in and talk to them about coping skills. So it gets them to think of what type of person they are, how they deal with issues, how they cope with stressful situations, right? It's kind of like riding a bike. If we don't teach our children how to deal with failure or stress, then they won't become good at it. We cannot continually solve the problems of our children. They have to be able to solve them for themselves, because the reality is like when you go to work, most people aren't coming in to solve your problems for you. That's your job at work, right? We all work, and if we're stressed at work, we still have to continually go into work and perform our jobs. The real world, that's the way the real world works. So we have to equip our children with some tools and some resiliency so that they can become healthy adults. And the second phase of that, the second part of Healthy Me, that's exactly what that talks about, and how to give them some tools for their toolbox in order to solve some of these problems that they're going through. The third part is we bring in the topic of drugs, and we still talk about cigarettes, and we talk about alcohol, we talk about marijuana. Because, as you see, we've talked about who they are, their beliefs, we talk about how they cope, and then the drug side of it is what creeps in if we don't have a firm grasp of the first two. So it's kind of sequential how it rolls out. And finally, the last part is the cyber world, because our children are absolutely getting touched up 24 hours a day, all the time. And it's very different for somebody my age. When I left school, and if I was having issues with somebody, it was done for the day. At least I could take a breath when I got home. That is not the case for our kids now. They're plugged in all the time. And it's funny, we had parents talking. The Making Waves group, which is part of the Partners for Youth, we spent Monday training others, and I believe here at François there is a Making Waves group. Yep. And you get huge value when you have peer-led initiatives where students speak to students. There's a huge buy-in, and it's good all the way around. Sometimes there's students that it forces the older students to come out of their comfort zone and have those conversations, and the younger students are looking at their peers saying, okay, that's why this makes sense when they say it. It might not make sense when the police officer's up front saying it, but it makes sense when they're saying it, and they're the people that they're passing when they're going to lunch. So there's a huge buy-in for that kind of thing. But when we talk to the students from Making Waves, there was absolutely anxiety was one of the biggest issues for drug use. And I am not here saying that people do not suffer from anxiety. Absolutely, there's people that suffer from anxiety. But there's also stress. And some stress is good because it causes us to perform the tasks that we need to do. Right? We know that as adults, that if we have stress to get something done by a deadline, we know that we have to have it done by that particular time. And in grade 6, when we're talking to these students, they've already been confronted with it. A lot of them have been walking through a park, asked if they would take this to package to somebody, or they're walking through the park and there's a group of teenagers getting high. Like, they're exposed to it. And there was huge buy-in, right, for this program. Like, we had the Teachers Federation gave us the okay, because for teachers to give up that class time is huge, right? So they're involved in it. The English Language School Board said certainly this will fall into our health curriculum. We had 100 women. They provided the funding for it, the Wisemans, the PEI Police Association. This was and the Charlottetown Police, like, for them to let their officers go and to do this. Like, this is a community initiative, and it's led by youth. Like, it couldn't be any better, to be honest with you. It couldn't be a better idea. So there's really, back to the point is that, grade 6 is definitely, you could have had the conversation grade 6 or before grade 6 about drugs. Your kids are dialed in, and most of them have had devices since they were in grade 4 or 5. Whether it was a tablet, or whether it was an iPad, or whether or not they have a phone, because they're asking for it. When can I have a phone? Because you'll be able to find me all the time then. It's what they come at you with, right? You'll be able to get me. But as soon as they get in a Wi-Fi area, they can search anything, right? And as soon as you sit there and figure out that what their password is and ask them, they're going to have a way to hide what they're looking for and what sites they're on. I mean, they can go on sites and say that they're 18 years old and access those sites, those social media sites, or they can look up anything. Like we have, it is scary of what children can access, and therefore they're growing up at a quicker rate than, say, we would have. They have all this information, but they might not know what to do with it in the correct way. So that's, we as parents play a vital role in that. We absolutely have to monitor what they're looking at. So when you do have those talks about drugs, like the Nancy Reagan years of don't do drugs, they're bad, are done. Because they're going to come at you with probably about 5 different sites where they've talked about the benefits of using, right? So you better be armed to the teeth when you're having that discussion, and you better have an open mind when you're having that discussion. Well, it's normalized now, right? Like it's normalized as opposed to before where it had that illegal component to it. And it's still illegal to be smoking in public marijuana or in your vehicle, right? It's either at your home, or if you have the permission of the owner of a property that you're at, then you're okay to do it. Now, apartment buildings are a very different thing. You need the permission of the owner of the building if you're allowed to smoke. And the designated smoking spots that we have in the city are not made for cannabis use, for marijuana use at all. That's still not what they're for. So, and that's some of the misconceptions that some of the younger people don't realize, right? And in this, it talks about that marijuana is illegal. It still is illegal for somebody under the age of 19 to have marijuana. However, what it is now is a provincial statute and a fine, right? It's decriminalized. So it would be the same as, say, a Liquor Control Act offense. You would get a ticket, as opposed to before where you could be charged criminally. So it's no wonder they're confused. As police, we're just wrapping our head around how this is all going to roll out and waiting to see how we police it and what it looks like and what can be policed is the reality. What I will do is since we're talking about the legality side of it right now, I'm going to turn it over to Constable Kennedy, and we're going to talk a little bit about the driving side of it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions first? Maybe that would be a good way to start when it comes to anything you want me to cover in particular. I'm not giving out free samples either, so don't. One group asked me if I was going to do that, and I said, no, I'm not. So it's actually under the Cannabis Act. Pardon me. So if you go in and look at the list of all the provincial acts and regulations, it would be under the Cannabis Act, and it lays out where you can't. It gives a definition like, just new. I just realized this the other day myself. Under the Cannabis Act now, because they had to cover a boat. So because if if it doesn't have a fridge and a stove and is capable of smoking so many people, smoking, wow, how much did you have in the parking lot, Ron? If it's capable of sleeping so many people, it's considered a dwelling, like a houseboat type thing, so then it's okay. If it doesn't have that fridge and doesn't have that stove, then it's just what's considered a conveyance, so it's a boat. It'd be no different than a motor vehicle then. So it is like, and for the law enforcement community, even I think everybody in general, is going to be a huge learning curve when it comes to it. In terms of enforcement for us, so basically the way marijuana works, it's just, in a real quick nutshell, it's the same as alcohol. You cannot drive down the road with your glass of wine, stop at a light, have some, continue on down the road. Does it happen? Absolutely. Do people drive around with an open container of liquor in their car? For sure they do. But you can't do it with marijuana either. You can't consume while the vehicle's in motion, and you can't consume, actually you can't consume in the vehicle if you're the primary operator. Or the passenger, yeah. It can, but it won't be psychoactive. It'll stay in your system. What stays in your system is the metabolites that your body uses to break down, right? So when we consume alcohol, our body breaks it down. It breaks it into different things, mostly carbon dioxide, water, ammonia, and we just urinate it out. Your body, when it breaks down marijuana, it makes some metabolites as well. They're about that long when they're written out, and I can't pronounce them. It's a cannabinoid metabolite. So it stays in your body, and it's easily detectable for, like you say, it depends on the person, days to weeks for that particular individual. Thank you. Yeah. The new oral fluid screening device, that will detect, it's set up to it's designed and set up to detect recent consumption, which is up to 6 hours after. Because you have to bear in mind, what people don't get with marijuana, people sometimes feel they don't have that hangover like they would. If you drank too much alcohol and you were hungover, you feel like crap. You probably wouldn't want to drive. You'd probably be tired. You probably wouldn't, right? You're just maybe too sick to drive the next day. With marijuana, you don't get that sickly hangover feeling because it impairs a different part of your brain. And when by doing so, what it does, it affects parts of your brain that affects your concentration, your divided attention. It affects your decision-making process. So you're not staggering drunk. You're not staggering around like you're drunk, and you don't have, but it's impairing a different part of your brain, and that is why. That is why you're a danger. You can be exhibiting effects of impairment for up to 24 hours after you consume, and it's totally based on each individual and how their body breaks it down, and it's totally based on the way in which you consume it and what you consumed, right, and how you consumed it. We can, yeah, we can. We always could. In the last few years, we can. That was a myth under the drug like a lot of people. Well, I got caught for impaired. I'm just going to smoke weed now all the time and drive. Oh, okay. We'll still catch you, but go ahead. But that was a myth that was out there,
and that fueled the fact that why our young people are more apt to be in with somebody who is impaired by marijuana as opposed to somebody who's under the influence of alcohol. We've done a great job telling them not to get into a car with somebody who's impaired by alcohol. Now we have to have the conversation of, you do not want to get into a car with somebody who's impaired due to marijuana, because the thought process in this is very different for young people of whether or not they can be in with somebody who smoked marijuana. They think
a lot of people raise their hands today.
Today there was a lot of people that raised their hands that have gotten into a vehicle with, we used the word someone they know has gotten into a vehicle with somebody who was impaired by marijuana, and there was a lot of kids that raised their hands saying that they had.
Yeah.
It's a very different It's, the thought process is not the same right at this particular point in time of whether it's just as bad to get in with somebody for young people, with somebody drinking as opposed to somebody with marijuana. They think it's okay.
Don't drive high.
And
Don't, if you're getting behind the wheel, there should be absolutely zero tolerance. And that's part of the graduated license program, where they can't have anything in their bloodstream, zero tolerance for any drugs until they get their license. That's why that's kind of, that mindset is there, that there's zero tolerance for that. Hopefully that carries on as they become more responsible, more mature drivers, right? That it's not acceptable anymore. I'm a breathalyzer technician too, and you know, like people say, well, who's your most common person you put on the breath? It's not as much the younger kids, it's the our age group, right? Like the 27, 28-year-olds, right, Tim?
I'm pretty sure that's right around our age.
It's that, and the older generation that drove for years impaired that still continue to do so, and they're just going to drive till they get caught or lose their license, or until they, you know, maybe injure themselves or someone else. But the misconception that really the most dangerous part with the youth that we want to do more of this, and we talked about it at some length today, is what they don't realize. So the legal limit for alcohol is 80 milligrams %. So right at that standard is set. That's what they call the per se limit. That at 80 milligrams %, everybody, once they hit that, is impaired. We're all impaired to different degrees, but to different levels and to different degrees of impairment. But once you hit that 80 milligrams %, no one should be behind the wheel. And the government, the legislators, our lawmakers, everybody was in agreement with that. So for marijuana, it's 5 nanograms. And a nanogram is just a different measurement. So 5 nanograms is what you're going to start hearing as the per se, or at 5 nanograms, they know that everybody that reaches that level is impaired. That may be a joint for you, it may be a joint and a half, but it's not a large amount. So you take that, can you hold that? I need to talk with my hands, please.
Certainly.
You are French, Ron.
I am. I need. So if you take a driver that has a blood alcohol of 80 or less, they're not impaired in and of itself. You take a driver that has a blood alcohol or a blood THC level of 5 nanograms, technically they're not impaired in and of itself. What happens is if you combine the two, what it does is it almost simulates someone, I'm not going to give a number, but it almost simulates someone having a much, much higher blood alcohol concentration. Because it's impairing 2 different parts of your brain, right? So you're impaired by 2 different drugs, and they're impairing different parts of your brain. That's what makes them so dangerous. So not only now are you less apt, so you're more apt to take risks, now you can't concentrate, divide your attention, your depth perception has gone in, your field of vision is severely reduced, your reaction time is slowed, and your whole thought and decision-making process is way out the window. And I tested a young gentleman, he was involved in a motor vehicle accident, and he was had got off the graduated part of his license, and he was involved in a motor vehicle collision. Took him back, and it was quite obvious he reeked of marijuana. And I mean, he was a textbook case of, I mean, it made my DRE job really easy. He was a textbook marijuana impairment. And I had him up, and I was doing the test with him, and his comment to me was, "Holy F, I can't believe how effing screwed up I am." Because when I start testing him, he said, "I've never done this before." And he said, "I didn't realize, I didn't think I was that high." And then when I had a conversation with him, he readily admitted, I should never have been driving. And I said, "Good, so now you know. At least you didn't kill anyone, you didn't hurt your passenger or yourself. You're still going to be charged with impaired driving." And he was cool with that. He ended up taking pled guilty to it. But for him, he learned a lesson, and hopefully he, spoke to his friends. And it's that message that we want to get out, because they think there seems to be a misconception. Well, if I go to a party and I'll have a couple of beer and I have a joint, I'll be okay. It's almost worse than if they had 6 or 8 beer and drove, because they don't realize the level to which they are impaired. and they think they're fine. So,
And we as parents, we have to really start taking a hard look. We are still setting the example for our children. If we have parents that, now that this is legal, are doing this in front of their children, do not be surprised if you're going to have the same, they're not going to repeat and mimic your actions, right? If you are smoking up, and if you're driving, and if you're using inside the home in front of your children, do not be surprised if your children adopt the same patterns and behaviors. There's the Youth Criminal Justice Act will apply, right? And in some cases, it will be dealt with either through the courts, or there's alt measures. There's a variety of different avenues that the Crown can decide and make recommendations for a young person that's selling. And there is absolutely, like, it's no different for the penalty section for if you're a 19-year-old providing marijuana to a younger person. There's a penalty section for that as well. The government does not want somebody who's 19 going to our distributors and providing it to younger. And like now, it just remains to be seen whether it's going to, what the impact is going to be on, now that they're buying it legally, how it's going to reflect on the illegal market. I mean, in talking with people, there's people that are not going to change who they purchase their marijuana from. It's still illegal, right? It's younger. It's still illegal for anybody under the age of 19 to have and possess marijuana. That has not changed. Has not changed. And the policies of the school are going to remain the exact same as they were prior to this. Yeah, it's going to be the exact same thing. Nothing has changed that way. No. My job as a school resource officer has changed drastically from what it was in the beginning compared to what it is now, right? I'm a resource for the school, but I still am a police officer, absolutely. And if somebody is dealing drugs at school, that's a very different conversation than somebody who's using drugs. Like, you know, one of the students asked me, they said, what if I have a friend that, if somebody come up to you and said that they smoke dope but they want help, are you going to arrest them? I said, absolutely not. I said, my job is to find them help and to try to get them into a program, or in a lot of instances where young people are struggling, like I will actually phone a good friend of mine named Carmina Gaete and say, can you have a meeting with mental health and addictions with this young person? And you know, that's worked out really well because of some of the relationships that you form with other people in other institutions, right? You know, I've had a young man that came to me and said, look, I used to deal drugs very recently, and I need out, and I just need something has to change. I'm terrified all the time. I said, well, yeah, I would imagine you are. So, you know, he was very straightforward with me, and we were talking, and in dealing with him and student services and everybody, wound up getting him a job. And he went to work and worked, and now is in an engineering program, right? Like that is a success story for school resources, is to reach out and make those connections, right? Like if I didn't have the relationship, if you don't work at the relationship with the students, then you're not going to have them come and benefit from the programs that you can get them into. It's all about relationships. And same with, I explained to students before that your child might not be okay with coming to you and talking to you about their thoughts on drugs. It's okay. You know, they might be kind of skirtish and it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. It means that that's an uncomfortable topic for them to have with you. But that doesn't mean that you can't say to them, I know that this is a different time and that there's lots of mixed messages going on. Who do you talk to at school? Who's your favorite teacher? Could you go have a conversation with them about this, or with an aunt or someone? Right? There's lots of kids that come down and have that conversation with me at school. Right? Because it's not threatening. They're not worried about, despite what you think, your children are still worried about disappointing you, no matter how much gears they give you. Right? And the one thing that I hope every officer gets the opportunity to take a spin working as a school resource officer at some point, because it grounds you again, and you realize that, you know what, I'm trying to think, I have to think really hard if I think that there's a child that really wasn't reachable, that didn't have qualities that you could get out of them, that you could, work with. And, I found that so refreshing. And I go into every single meeting with young people very non-judgmental. Very non-judgmental. And I can't sit and say, your friends smoke dope. You have to leave them right now and stay away from them. They're no good. Because you're making it way more attractive for them. And when you start talking about their friends like that, all of a sudden, you've pretty much eliminated yourself from that conversation.
I mean, the biggest thing you're going to see with, particularly with marijuana use, is the change in behavior. You're going to notice a change in their, just their overall demeanor, right? Because they're going to be, I guess it's not, they say marijuana can sometimes make kids lazy, but then I start thinking about mine and I find, where's the line there? We just do so much for our kids anyway, so it's hard to discern where we stop and they. So I guess their lack of ambition and.
Change of friends group.
Yeah, that's another big one. A sudden change or a gradual change in their friends groups. They're no longer hanging around with the buddies that they grew up playing hockey with these last 15, 10 years or whatever. Now they're with a bunch of kids and you're hearing names that you've never heard before. Right? The biggest indicator, their clothes. Smell their clothes. When they come in and their jacket reeks, why is your jacket reeking? What's in your pockets? I check my kids' pockets all the time because I wash their clothes.
Reeks of Axe.
Yeah, or they're or a cover-up.
Overcompensate for it, right?
Yeah. I mean, something simple as that. What's the thing they're going to tell you all the time? If you found a joint in there, I'm holding this for a friend,
Yeah.
right? It's like the person that I stopped for impaired driving. Every single one of them has 2 beer. No one has more or less. It's always 2. But the kids will always tell you that they're holding it for someone else, right? Or it's my friend's, or I found it, or
And we want to believe that it's not theirs as parents.
Yeah.
We do not want to think that it's our child.
Like some of the physical indicators that you may notice on someone smoking marijuana. Marijuana will cause your pupils to dilate. You can't control that. Just like an opiate causes your pupils to constrict, gives you these little pinpoint pupils, marijuana causes dilation. And no matter how, and usually reddening of the conjunctiva, no matter how much Visine they put in their eyes, they can't bring their pupils back down to size.
And if you find Visine, that would be...
Visine is another indicator,
That's another
right?
indicator.
Or lighters and
Grinders.
grinders to grind it up, or a bomb, right? A big glass tube or a little pipe. Sure, like, you know what? They're still subject to search and seizure in your house. Have a quick look in the kit bag, right? Or that may be the key. Like maybe they always used to leave their kit bag in the porch. Now their kit bag goes everywhere with them. They're taking their kit bag A to B in their house, in the bed, sleeping with their kit bag right by their bed. That may be a good indicator, like a sudden change in.
Or a little lockbox that you never noticed.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's locked.
Yeah. Just little different behaviors like that. And if you go into a room and marijuana is like they're trying to hide it in their bedroom somewhere in their room, you're going to go, what's that smell? And you'll know, and especially if they're smoking at home. I know a popular thing now is a lot of them are vaping. Vaping is becoming very popular, and they're trying to hide the smell of it. And some of the oils, it's very hard to detect it. So that's it's another issue. And wait till next year when we start getting into edibles. Edibles will be available, and there'll be no smell at all. But Junior will have a Girl Guide box full of marijuana cookies in there. So yeah, they'll hide them with regular gummy bears, and you probably won't be able to tell the difference, right? Suckers, gummy bears, cookies. Edibles are on the list for next year. It's the marijuana release now. Marijuana oils, and then next year it's edibles and everything else, suppositories, God knows whatever else is coming.
It's going to go into the system. Ron will explain in a second the difference between when you're using it and smoking it as opposed to eating it, and how it's released into the system. Because when you eat it, they might not feel the effects right away, so they think that they're not getting anything out of it, so they're eating more. And there's some very serious health issues as a result of that.
There's a misconception out there, and I mean, I don't mean to. There is a misconception out there, and I've noticed, I can't remember if it was one of the media outlets talking about overdosing on marijuana. You can't overdose on marijuana per se. What it does is it makes you, you can become toxic to marijuana. That would probably require a trip to the emergency room, but it's not like an opiate where it's going to stop your heart, lower your heart rate so much that it's going to stop your heart and make you kind of stop breathing on your own. But it will cause incidents of paranoia. It will cause incidents of, pardon? Yeah, psychosis and stuff, and just my phone won't stop in my pocket. But it will cause people to like get sick, and it'll just be a really, really, really bad experience for them. And a lot of them end up going to hospital. I think I'm dying. I had too much marijuana, and that's what'll happen. Tim mentioned it, and I'll just continue on from there. When you're smoking marijuana, smoking is the fastest way to ingest any drug, right? So that's why, when opium first came on, they smoked opium. People smoke cigarettes, right? They don't make cigarettes into cookies and eat cookies outside. Smoking is the fastest way to get it in. Then it's injecting, and then through the nose, and then in orally. What happens when you consume marijuana, you smoke it. Within seconds, it crosses the barrier and goes right into your bloodstream, right to the brain. So I'll back up a few steps here. When we all drink alcohol, we know how alcohol makes us feel. We have a couple of beer, and then eventually your blood alcohol starts to come up. You start feeling good. You peak, and then you slowly sober up. And then it gets out of your system, right? Marijuana, it's a different curve altogether. It's the level of THC spikes really, really quick because you've induced it really, really quick. You level off, and then you have this drop. So that's why it's so dangerous when you smoke right after you drive, or smoke before you drive, or smoke before you drive, is because you've just darted your level of impairment way up because your THC, the amount that you've consumed, right? So when we eat, like Tim said, it takes a little longer to get into your bloodstream. The other thing about edibles is you definitely won't feel the effects as quick, but it will last longer. Usually things we take orally last longer than if we inject them or smoke them, right? It's just the way our bodies work. It takes longer to get into your system. It's going to take longer to get out typically. So that's how like edibles will function that way. And every other in talking to other officers that had that was probably that caused them the most grief. Is people, like Tim said, they went out, had a cookie, didn't feel high, had another one, and go, this is no good. I'm just going to smoke my joint instead. And then they drive down the road, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're into a collision because it hits them.
When you talked a little bit too about parents and how will they detect whether or not your child is using or not, one of the big things is the reality is that you're going to have some warning signs from the educators. Because in today's society, we usually have two parents that are working. The days are gone of Little House on the Prairie where one parent stays home and gets everything ready, and it's just very difficult to do in today's society not to have two parents out working. So our parents go to work. We see them in the morning for get their lunches packed, get them breakfast, and we go to work and they hop on the bus and head to school, right? And they're at school for those 6 hours of the day with the educators who see them every day, 5 days a week, right? For a whole school year, they're noticing very subtle changes in your child. Then all of a sudden, right, we come home, we rush like crazy to get supper on the table, get the dishes done, and our childs go off and play Fortnite or do whatever they're going to do. And then at around 7 o'clock, we sit down and think about what a crazy day this was. And then we have about an hour window where we sit, maybe, with our children again and watch a show or just chill with our children. So we've spent about 2 hours a day, whereas the educator has spent, and it's no fault of our own, that's just the way life is now for us. And the educator has spent all that time with them. So then we get a phone call saying that I don't know what's going on with little Sammy, that his grades he's starting to slip, he's starting to miss some classes. And I didn't know he was missing classes. So you sit there and you say, well, okay, I'll have a conversation, we'll come in. They come in, they have the conversation, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with Sammy. Of course, Sammy's going to feed a million different things that are going on, but you can rest assured the marijuana usage wasn't one of them. Then a little bit later on, you're noticing that he's missing more time. And you're thinking, not my kid wouldn't be doing that. But the educator's saying there's something going on here. It's a reality. And I see this quite often in the school system because that's where I'm at now. Where the young person starts to all of a sudden lose focus because of the marijuana, and they start to fall behind. And then all of a sudden that stress that they've been experienced before, now they're really stressed out because they're falling behind in this particular class, and that stress now turns into anxiety for them. They're anxious because they can't be in that class. They know they're not going to get that credit, and there's nothing they can do. Holy jumpins, what am I going to do? So what do? They go out at lunch. You wouldn't believe the hands went up when we said how many people, someone they know, smokes marijuana at lunch hour. There was a lot of hands that went up, right? And this is a small group, so I can only imagine what it is for the larger schools, what the group is. And I'm not saying that every child is using. Lots of our kids make great choices. Lots of our kids make great choices. And some don't. But it's amazing how you see them all of a sudden when they fall behind in that particular subject, that all of a sudden they're said, you know what, there's no likelihood that you're going to get this particular credit. Maybe you should concentrate on these 3 credits. So then all of a sudden they've got a free or whatever, and what do? Exactly that. And then they start to slip in that second subject. And eventually they're not going to get the second subject. Then all of a sudden they're a half-time student, right? Well, it's too difficult to get up I'm slept all morning, I don't feel like going this afternoon. Or if I do go this afternoon, I'll go a little bit early and hook up with my friends, and what am I going to do? Then all of a sudden they miss that third class and start to fall behind. Now they have that sense of that they can't accomplish it, that they're not a student. And these are kids that were good students too prior to this. And eventually you're saying to them, you know what, you're not engaged at all here. So why don't we try again in January? Absolutely, and there's student well-being teams. There's at the school now. There's at some schools. There's also student services that they have great counselors that you can access. There's addictions workers that are in the schools. Like to be honest with you, probably while they're in school is the best time to. There's all kinds of supports while they're in school. Right, and how do you deal with that discussion when they do tell you that right? Is it going to be that, well, that's it, I'm taking the car away, I'm taking the phone away, you're not, right? That's not a real discussion to have. That's not really, that's going to be totally unproductive.
And I think it's important too for parents not to say, just don't say no, 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 but say why. It's bad because this is what it does to your brain. This is what it does to your body. This is how you're screwing, not screwing your life up, but screwing up your wiring for your brain. You have to tell them why. As long as you know. Yeah, definitely don't go into that conversation without knowing, without doing some research or talking to someone or finding out.
As parents, we're all going to handle that conversation differently, right? Like when you get it for the first time, you might be like, and try to you have to wrap your head around it, right? Because it is a very different conversation than the one that we were used to, than the conversation that our parents may have had with us. It's a different conversation now. What's that? The conversation about marijuana usage. Oh, and some parents don't have the conversation at all. That's right, which is scary in itself, right? So are you going to be the parent that's going to sit there and say, be oblivious to it, and say that it's not going to happen, and have your child sit there and tell you that they're going to a friend's house for the night and you don't see them? And that's great because in your rosy world, your kid's over there watching, I don't know, Little House on the Prairie again, right, with his friends, right?
You're obsessed with that, aren't you?
I am obsessed. It's Disney, I should say Disney, yeah. Because the reality is that you're going to be, you would sooner be the parent that is saying, what time is this? You're setting the time, saying this is when I'm going to pick you up, and I'm going to be there to pick you up and get you. So at least you know that what state your child's in when they leave that particular party. You're picking them up. You know whether they can carry a conversation with you, and you're having dialogue about what went on at the party, what they had to drink, who was full at the party, what it all looks like. You have to have those types of conversations, and you're non-judgmental about it, right? Because I would love to see in an auditorium full of parents how many never went to a party before the age of 19. Love to see.
The other thing too about that is, I talked about hearing different names. How many parents don't know who all their kids are or kids' friends are? Because if I'm starting to hear a name, and I know all my sons, I have 3 boys, and I know every one of their friends, and I start hearing a different name, I want to go to such and such, the flags are, well, who's that? And right, not judgmental, but I just want to know who it is. But it's amazing when you get their friends alone, the stuff that they'll tell you about your kid. Especially anyone involved in sports. Like I'm a trainer for a couple of hockey teams, and I ask my kid. I have a good rapport with a lot of the kids, and I'll go, "Hey, how's Meathead doing? And what's he been like at parties and stuff?" And Meathead has to protect his innocence, but it's amazing. They'll tell you, like, unless they're all every kid I talk to can't be bullshitting me. I'd eventually pick it up somewhere, but and they're pretty forthcoming. Like if they, you know, if you just talk to them at their level, right? It's not like you're being inquisitive or you're just, you know, you're demanding answers. You're just asking a few random questions, and I found that that worked really well as well.
But we as parents facilitate that, right? That's the reality, is that we try to give our kids everything that we can give them, right? And sometimes they don't know how to work towards those goals. And it's the same in the classroom. They expect to be at a certain level without putting in the work to get there. And when that doesn't happen, that's when all these problems start to arise. Absolutely. Because everything in our world now is at our fingertips. Everything. So how can we expect them to be any different and to feel any different? God, we're like that. I know, like, if I want to know something, I'm going to just go on my phone, hit Google, and I'm going to know about it right away. I'm not going to read a book. All right? I'll get the specifics of what I need. Oh, you can rest assured that there's going to be study after study in relation to this to see where we are as Canadians as a result of this after.
Car accidents, Ron, you said that this
Yeah.
afternoon.
Just in, I'll talk an area I'm familiar with, in traffic collisions, when they first, Colorado was one of the first states when they've implemented it. Speaking with some of the officers there, one of the things that they found is they had a huge spike in impaired fatalities, and a lot of it I kind of alluded to, especially with the edibles. I had an edible, it didn't work, I smoked, or I had another edible, so they got even more impaired and ended up becoming involved in a collision. And so some of the traffic related stuff did spike, but then it kind of leveled off, and then it kind of normally, after I guess the novelty of it kind of wore off, it went back to normal. It never went as low as it always was, but it went back to like close to it. And I know, like, now the Canadian government is really interested in, well, they're putting a lot of money out to train officers to be field sobriety testers and to be drug recognition experts. And they're really curious. They really want to do a lot of tracking to see if it's working and if it's having an effect. You asked the question, and I feel bad we didn't answer your question. And we'll do it real quick. You talked about the soft drug and the gateway, and I explained it to the class when they were here today. When we do our drug recognition training, we have to follow up, and what we do, we have to do hands-on testing with live impaired subjects.
And where do you do that, Ron?
Thanks, Tim. Jacksonville, Florida, and Phoenix, Arizona. And I usually get to go in January or February, so it makes Timmy mad. So it's kind of a sore spot. So we do have to do some hands-on, and you get to know some of the subjects that you test over and over. And like we explained to the class today, not one, and you hear different stories, right? How people get addicted, and I have a genuine interest in that. But not one of them ever said, you know what, I just woke up one morning and I was going to be a crack addict or a heroin addict. Not one of them said that. A lot of them said I started smoking marijuana. And marijuana just led me to more. I just started adding cocaine to my marijuana, or I started adding other substances to marijuana. Or the other thing was someone had a medical procedure, they were involved in an accident and got hooked on painkillers, right? It was one, you know, if I had to, you know, it was either one of those two stories that you seem to hear over and over. There's also other personal stories, but that was the common theme for a lot of them. So in terms of marijuana, that being the gateway drug, I still to this day believe that that's true for some.